I thought I was leaving my estate to my grandchildren. But at the reading of my will, I discovered my own son had forged the documents, erasing their names, and mine, as if I'd already died to him. That was the moment I decided he'd regret underestimating the old man with one foot in the grave. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. After my wife Margaret passed, the only joy I had left was my two grandchildren, Ella and James. They'd visit on weekends, playing in the same garden their grandmother once tended. That garden was Margaret's sanctuary. She planted roses in neat rows, tulips in playful clusters, and herbs in a little patch by the kitchen window so she could snip sprigs of thyme and rosemary for Sunday dinners. Even now, the air still carried her touch. When Ella bent down to pluck a daisy, or James chased butterflies across the lawn, I could almost hear Margaret's laughter echoing with theirs. Without her, the house had grown unbearably quiet. I'd wake up at 5:30, as I always had, and still reach across the bed expecting to find her hand. Instead, I'd find only cool sheets and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. The silence was heavy, not the comfortable kind we used to share over morning coffee, but a hollow sort that gnawed at the edges of the day. If not for the children, I might have let that silence consume me. "Grandpa, can I water the tomatoes?" Ella asked one afternoon, gripping the little tin watering can Margaret had bought her years ago. She was 8, serious as a little professor, her brow furrowed as she tipped the can just enough to drizzle a line of water across the soil. James, only 6, had no such patience. He barreled through the rows in his grass-stained jeans, holding up an earthworm like a trophy. "Look, Grandpa. It's huge." I laughed, for the first time in weeks, a deep laugh that shook the grief loose from my chest. They weren't just my grandchildren. They were my lifeline. That was when I decided to put everything in order. Not just for me, but for them. I wanted them to grow up with security, with something to hold on to when I was gone. The house, the savings, even the old farmland in Missouri that had been in my family for generations, it would all pass to them one day. A legacy of love and labor, not money or greed. I called my lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a sharp man in his 70s who'd known me since I was a young husband struggling to make mortgage payments. We sat in his oak-paneled office while he adjusted his glasses and scribbled notes. "So you want it all to go directly to the grandchildren?" he asked. "Yes," I said firmly. "Ella and James. Not their parents. Just them." His pen paused. He looked up at me over the rim of his glasses. "That's unusual, Mr. Harlow. Most people leave things to their children first." I leaned back, my hands clasped over my cane. "My son doesn't need it. And frankly, he doesn't deserve it. But those kids, they'll make something good of it. Margaret would want that." Thompson nodded slowly, his eyes softening with understanding. "All right. Then we'll make it ironclad. No one can contest it without showing their true colors." I told no one but him. Not my daughter-in-law, with her polite smiles that never reached her eyes. And certainly not my son, Daniel. Especially not Daniel. Because even then, before anything had happened, I could feel the hunger in him, the same way a farmer can smell rain before the clouds roll in. Daniel. My only son. If you had asked me 25 years ago what I thought of him, I would have told you he was bright, ambitious, and destined for great things. Back then, I carried him on my shoulders at the county fair, his little hands gripping my hair as he pointed at the Ferris wheel. He'd begged me to win him a stuffed bear at the ring toss, and when I finally did after 20 tries, his grin lit up the whole fairground. I remember the night Margaret whispered to me, while folding his pajamas fresh from the clothesline, "He's going to be somebody, Henry. Just wait. That boy has fire in him." She wasn't wrong. Daniel had fire. But somewhere along the way, it burned too hot. It stopped lighting his path and started scorching everything in his reach. When he was in high school, I saw the first cracks. Dad, everyone else is getting the new sneakers, he told me, arms crossed at the kitchen table. His plate of spaghetti sat untouched. Do you know how embarrassing it is to wear off-brand stuff? You've got shoes that work fine, I replied. Your mother and I don't believe in buying things just for labels. He slammed his fork down, the clatter echoing against the walls. You don't get it. People notice. They laugh. I tried to explain the value of hard work, of saving, of dignity in simplicity. He didn't listen. He stormed off, muttering something about how I'd never understand the world he lived in. By college, the gap had widened. I still remember visiting him on campus, Margaret carrying a care package of cookies and homemade scarves. His dorm room smelled of beer and stale pizza. He barely looked at us as he scrolled on his phone. Son, I asked gently, how are classes going? Fine, Dad, he said, not meeting my eyes. Look, can you just transfer me the money for books? They're way more expensive than you think. I did, of course. I always did. Even when Margaret worried aloud that we were spoiling him, I told her, he'll find his footing. He just needs time. But time didn't fix anything. The boy who once cried when he scraped his knee in the garden grew into a man who measured everything by dollar signs and appearances. And after Margaret died, the change in him was like night and day. He no longer called to check in on me, just to ask about plans. His visits became rehearsed performances, full of forced smiles and glances at his watch. And every conversation, no matter how it began, always circled back to money. One evening, not long after the funeral, he came by with his wife, Claire. We sat in the living room, Margaret's photo still framed on the mantel. Daniel looked around the house like a real estate agent surveying a property. This place must be a lot to handle, Dad, he said casually. It's fine, I replied, sipping my tea. I keep up with it. Claire leaned in with her usual syrupy tone. You know, Henry, you'd be so much more comfortable if you downsized. A condo maybe. Somewhere modern. You don't need all this space. Her eyes flicked toward the antique clock, the oak bookshelves, the embroidered curtains Margaret had sewn with her own hands. She said, all this space, but I heard what she really meant, all this value. I forced a smile, but inside, something twisted. I could feel Margaret's absence sharper in moments like that, because she would have seen it too. The hunger in their eyes. I didn't answer. Instead, I just listened, as Daniel said. Dad, you really ought to start planning. I mean, no one lives forever. You wouldn't want things to get messy when. He trailed off, but the word he didn't say, when you die, hung heavy in the air. That was the night I decided to see Mr. Thompson the very next morning. I hadn't yet discovered what Daniel would do, the forgery, the betrayal that would tear open everything between us, but I knew then, in my bones, that my son was no longer the boy Margaret once believed in. He was something else entirely. It started with little things, small moments that most fathers might brush off, but that settled into my gut like stones. The first was one Sunday afternoon, about a month after Margaret's funeral. Daniel had brought Claire and the children over for dinner. I was glad, at first, it had been too quiet in the house. But while Ella and James chased each other through the garden, their laughter a balm to my grief, I caught Daniel in my study. The door was cracked open, and I saw him standing by my desk, a manila folder in his hands. Looking for something, son? I asked, stepping into the doorway. He jumped, snapping the folder shut. Oh, Dad, I was just trying to find a pen. There's one by the phone in the kitchen, I said evenly. He laughed too loudly. Right. Of course. Just figured you'd have one in here. He slipped the folder back into the drawer, but I noticed it wasn't the one with stationery, it was the drawer where I kept my financial records. I didn't press the matter then. Maybe I should have. A few weeks later, Claire let something slip. She'd always been polite, sweet on the surface, but with a sharpness in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. That night, over coffee, she leaned toward me, her voice sugary and coaxing. "You know, Henry, with Daniel's work in finance, he could really help you manage everything. These accounts, the properties. It must be so overwhelming at your age." I stirred my coffee slowly. "I manage just fine." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course you do. But wouldn't it be nice to let go of all that stress? You could spend more time with the grandchildren. Let Daniel take care of the complicated parts." Her hand rested on his arm. He nodded, but didn't meet my gaze. It was then I realized, she wasn't just echoing his thoughts. She was shaping them. Their marriage had been a turning point for him. Before Claire, Daniel had always been restless, chasing promotions, switching jobs, living just a little above his means. But after they married, it became something sharper. Every dinner conversation turned into talk of new houses, new cars, private schools, vacations in Europe. I remember one night, years earlier, when Margaret confided to me in bed, "Claire wants more than Daniel can give her. You watch, he'll twist himself in knots to keep up." Margaret had been right, as always. The third incident came not long after. Daniel stopped by on a Saturday morning, saying he wanted to check in. We were sitting in the living room, the morning light spilling across the old rug Margaret and I had bought for our first house. "Dad," he said, crossing one leg over the other. "I've been thinking, you've got all these assets. The farmland in Missouri, this house, the savings accounts. What's the plan for all that?" I frowned. "The plan? Yeah. I mean, if something happened to you," he hesitated, then pressed on. "You wouldn't want Mom's hard work, or yours, to end up tied up in probate, would you? It'd be smarter to just put it in my name now. Avoid all that legal mess." My heart tightened, not from age but from something colder. He hadn't even bothered to dress it up in concern for my health. Just straight to the point, hand it over. I leaned forward, resting both hands on my cane. "Daniel," I said quietly, "your mother and I worked for everything we have. And it will go where it's meant to go. That's not for you to decide." For the first time, I saw something flash across his face, anger, quickly hidden under a forced smile. "Of course, Dad. I just thought. I was trying to help. But I knew better." The final straw came that summer. I'd been in the hospital after a fall, just a broken wrist, nothing serious. When I came home, the study felt disturbed. Papers slightly out of place. My desk drawer didn't close as smoothly as it used to. 2 days later, I found a page torn from my checkbook in the trash, crumpled but legible. My signature, traced and practiced in someone else's hand. That was when suspicion hardened into certainty. Daniel wasn't waiting for me to die. He was preparing for it. It happened during that long summer, the one when the air seemed to press down heavy on my chest and every evening ended with a storm rumbling somewhere in the distance. Daniel had been visiting more often than usual. At first, I thought perhaps he was softening, trying to be the son Margaret had always hoped for. But his visits were always the same. He'd drift through the house like an appraiser, running his hand along the banister, asking casual questions that weren't casual at all. "Dad, did you ever get around to updating the deed on the Missouri farmland? You know, transferring it from your father's name to yours. Dad, where exactly do you keep the original copies of your will? Just curious. Dad, I was reading that sometimes banks freeze accounts if there's no power of attorney. Maybe we should set that up." He always said it with that same practiced smile, as if he were offering me help. But beneath the smile, there was hunger. One evening, I came downstairs to find him sitting at my desk in the study. He had papers spread in front of him and a pen in his hand. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He jolted, then quickly shuffled the papers into a neat stack. "Nothing, Dad." Just going over some old tax records. Thought maybe I could help you organize them. His tone was light, but I noticed the way his hand hovered just a little too long over the drawer where I kept my important documents. I didn't press it then. But the knot in my stomach tightened. Weeks later, I fell ill. Just a mild infection, but it kept me in bed for nearly a week. Claire came by with soup, smiling as though she were doing me some saintly favor, while Daniel helped himself to my study again. I was too weak to protest. I heard drawers sliding open, the faint crackle of parchment, the sound of a pen scratching. At the time, I convinced myself I was imagining it. I told myself no son could betray his father so deeply. But then came the day Mr. Thompson, my lawyer, called me into his office. When I arrived, he looked graver than I'd ever seen him. His office smelled of leather and dust, the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. He gestured for me to sit, then slid a folder across the desk. "Henry," he said carefully, "this document was sent to the clerk's office last week. Supposedly signed by you." I opened the folder. My breath caught. It was my will, almost identical to the one we had drawn up months before. But where it had once named Ella and James as my heirs, every line had been changed. The farmland, the savings, the house, all of it was assigned to Daniel. Not a mention of the children. Not even of Claire. Just him. And there, at the bottom of the page, was my signature. My name, flowing neatly in black ink, as though I had signed it myself. But I hadn't. I looked closer. The pen strokes were practiced, too practiced. Whoever had done it had traced my name over and over again until it was flawless. My hands trembled as I pushed the papers back toward Thompson. "This isn't mine." "I know," he said grimly. "I suspected as much. That's why I called you here instead of letting the court process it." He opened another folder, pulling out a series of photocopies. I had the handwriting expert I work with examine it. "Henry, it's a forgery. A very good one, but still a forgery." For a long time, I couldn't speak. My mind kept circling back to one thought: my son did this. The boy I once carried on my shoulders. The boy Margaret believed in. Daniel had sat in my study, with my wife's photo on the mantel watching over him, and forged my name onto a document that erased my grandchildren from their inheritance as if they didn't exist. When I left Thompson's office that day, the heat outside felt suffocating. I walked slowly to my car, every step heavier than the last. I sat behind the wheel for nearly half an hour, staring at nothing, my chest aching, not from age, but from betrayal. That night, Daniel called me, his voice unusually warm. "Hey Dad, how are you feeling?" "I was just thinking, maybe we should all have dinner soon. Talk about the future. Claire's been saying we should help take some of the burden off your shoulders." The burden. He meant my estate. My life's work. I answered calmly, hiding the storm inside me. "Dinner sounds good, son." Because in that moment, I decided, if Daniel wanted a game, I'd play it. But I'd make sure he never forgot who he was playing against. That night, after Daniel's call, I didn't go to bed right away. Sleep felt impossible. Instead, I sat in the garden, the same garden Margaret had once tended, the crickets chirping in the dark like 1,000 clocks ticking all at once. The moonlight lit the roses, their petals pale silver in the night air. Margaret's roses. And then, just as if the world knew I needed reminding, I heard the soft padding of little feet behind me. "Grandpa." Ella stood there in her nightgown, holding the stuffed bear I'd won for her at the fair last spring. Her hair was tangled from sleep, her eyes heavy but still curious. "Can't sleep?" I asked gently. She shook her head. "Had a bad dream." I pulled her onto my lap, the way I used to do with her father when he was her age. She leaned against my chest, her small frame fitting perfectly into the hollow my grief had carved out. "What kind of dream?" I asked. That you weren't here anymore, she whispered. And the garden was all empty. My throat tightened. I kissed the top of her head. I'll be here, sweetheart. For as long as I can. She nodded, half asleep already, trusting me with the absolute faith only children have. When I carried her back inside and tucked her into bed, I paused in the hallway. James was sprawled across his little mattress, his arm dangling off the side, his face still sticky with the ice cream we'd had after dinner. His chest rose and fell with the rhythm of innocence. I stood there, watching them breathe, and I knew, everything I was about to do wasn't about me. It wasn't about punishing Daniel for his greed, or humiliating him for his betrayal. It was about Ella and James. It was about making sure no matter what Daniel did, they would have something real, a home, a legacy, the proof that their grandfather loved them enough to fight back. And in that moment, I felt Margaret with me again, her hand resting on my shoulder, her voice soft in my ear, "Take care of them." I whispered into the stillness, "I will, love. I promise." The very next morning, I drove to Mr. Thompson's office. He looked up from his paperwork as I entered, his eyes narrowing at the determination in my step. "Henry," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I take it you've thought things through." "I've thought of nothing else," I replied. "My son forged my will. He tried to erase my grandchildren from their own future. And if I don't stop him, he'll try again. Maybe worse." Thompson folded his hands. "So what do you want to do?" I took a long breath, the weight of it settling deep in my chest. "I want him caught. Exposed. I don't want to just undo what he's done, I want everyone to see what he is. So he can't pretend anymore. Not to me, not to them, not even to himself." A small smile tugged at the corner of Thompson's mouth. "Then we'll need to be smart. Fortunately, I've seen forgers before. They all make the same mistake, they think the paper is the prize. But the paper is just the noose." We began laying the plan piece by piece. First, we secured the real will, locked, notarized, witnessed, and filed in ways Daniel could never touch. The trust for Ella and James was reinforced with legal protections, meaning no one, not even their parents, could tamper with it. Then, Thompson prepared a duplicate set of documents. Not real ones, but convincing enough to bait Daniel further if he tried anything else. Finally, we documented everything, expert testimony confirming the forgery, time-stamped evidence showing Daniel had submitted it, and even copies of his earlier requests to take control of my assets. "Once this comes to court," Thompson said, adjusting his glasses, "he'll have nowhere to hide. The judge will see not just fraud, but intent. And intent, Henry, is what destroys reputations." I sat back, exhaling slowly. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt something close to relief. It wasn't joy, no, joy was gone. But it was resolve. This wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. This was protection. This was love, sharpened into a weapon. I thought of Ella's small voice saying, "I dreamed you weren't here anymore." And I whispered under my breath, so quiet Thompson didn't hear, "Even if I'm not, he'll never take you away from me." The night of the family dinner, I polished the old oak dining table Margaret had loved so much. I laid out her china, the good set with tiny blue flowers around the rim. It felt almost ceremonial, as if Margaret herself was presiding over what I knew would be one of the last meals we would ever share as family. Ella and James arrived first, skipping into the house with the wild energy only children can carry. Ella hugged me tight, whispering, "You made the mashed potatoes the way Grandma used to, didn't you?" James immediately asked if we could play cards after dessert. For a moment, I let myself soak in their laughter. That was the calm before the storm. Daniel and Claire arrived 15 minutes late, dressed too finely for what was supposed to be a simple dinner. Daniel wore a tailored blazer. Claire's perfume announced her 3 steps before she entered the room. "Dad," Daniel said, leaning in to kiss my cheek, his smile a little too rehearsed. Smells wonderful in here. Claire glanced at the china, her lips curling in polite approval. So nice you still use these. They'll make a beautiful heirloom one day. The word heirloom lingered like a drop of oil in water. We sat, and for a while the children's chatter covered the table. Ella told me about her piano lessons, James about the goal he'd scored at soccer. I nodded, laughed, filled their plates. But I noticed how Daniel barely listened, and how Claire's eyes kept drifting toward the grandfather clock in the corner, the antique cabinet, the silverware. She wasn't seeing memories. She was seeing assets. Halfway through the meal, Daniel leaned back, swirling his wine. Dad, Claire and I were talking the other night. You've done such a wonderful job with, well, everything. The house, the land, your accounts. But it's a lot to manage at your age. I speared a piece of roast, chewing slowly. I manage. Of course, he said quickly. But think of the stress it puts on you. It would be easier if someone younger, someone with financial experience, took the reins. You could just enjoy your time with the grandchildren. Claire chimed in smoothly, her voice honeyed but sharp. Henry, you've given so much. Maybe it's time to let others give back. Daniel could take care of things. You'd never have to worry again. I dabbed my mouth with a napkin. Is that so? Yes, Daniel pressed, his confidence growing with every word. Look, it's not just about you. It's about us as a family. About protecting everything you've built. What if something happened tomorrow? Do you want things tied up in probate? Lawyers dragging it out? No, far better to have it all already under my care. Streamlined. Ella looked up from her plate, frowning. But Grandpa, you're not going anywhere. Her words cut through the room like glass shattering. For a moment, no one spoke. Daniel forced a laugh, patting her hand. Of course not, sweetheart. Grandpa's strong as an ox. We're just planning responsibly, that's all. But his eyes flicked to mine, full of impatience, almost challenge. And in that moment, I realized, he thought he had already won. He thought the forged will was safely filed, that I was too old or too sentimental to fight back. So I smiled. I let the silence stretch, then said, Daniel, you might be right. Maybe it is time to make sure things are in order. His face lit up with barely contained triumph. Exactly. I knew you'd see it our way. But, I continued, pouring myself a slow glass of wine, these things take time. Paperwork, lawyers. Let's not rush. After all, Margaret always said, haste makes mistakes. Claire's smile faltered just slightly, but Daniel leaned back in his chair, smug. Of course, Dad. We'll give it time. I raised my glass. To family, I said evenly. They raised theirs. Ella and James clinked their milk glasses, giggling. And as I drank, I thought of the documents already locked in Thompson's office, of the handwriting expert's sworn statement, of the ironclad trust in Ella and James' names. Let Daniel bask in his illusion of victory tonight. Soon enough, in a courtroom full of witnesses, he'd learn exactly what kind of mistake haste had made for him. The morning before the hearing, I sat in Mr. Thompson's office once more. The walls smelled faintly of leather and old paper, sunlight streaming in thin slats through the blinds. Henry, Thompson said, sliding a folder toward me, this is it. Everything we need. The original, notarized will. The trust documents for Ella and James. The handwriting expert's affidavit confirming the forgery. And, he tapped another folder, the clerk's official record of Daniel submitting the fake document. I reached out, my hand shaking just slightly, not from age this time but from the gravity of it all. And once this is read aloud. He adjusted his glasses, eyes steady. Once it's read, your son will be publicly exposed. There will be no covering this up, no excuses. The court will see him for what he is. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. For a moment, Margaret's face came to me, smiling, gentle, the way she'd looked on our wedding day. I whispered so softly Thompson barely heard, "This is for the children." "For her." Thompson nodded, his voice firm. "And that's what makes it ironclad, Henry. Not vengeance. Legacy." I left his office that morning with the weight of years on my shoulders, but also with a strange lightness in my chest. Tomorrow, Daniel would finally meet the truth. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old carpet, a mix of authority and dust. Rows of benches filled quickly, Claire perched stiffly at Daniel's side, her lips pressed thin. Ella and James sat quietly with a family friend, their wide eyes taking everything in. I sat near the front, cane in hand, my face calm. Daniel walked in wearing a sharp suit, his hair slicked back, confidence radiating from every step. He looked at me once, a faint smirk curling his lips, as if to say, "This is already done, old man." The judge entered, papers shuffled, and the proceedings began. "Today we hear the matter of the estate of Henry Harlow, regarding the contested will," the clerk read aloud. I folded my hands in my lap. The forged document was presented first. Daniel's attorney, a young man with too much swagger and too little experience, stood tall. "Your Honor, this will, signed and submitted, clearly names my client, Mr. Daniel Harlow, as sole heir to the estate. The signature is authentic." "Objection," Thompson's voice cut through like a blade. He rose slowly, his years lending gravity to every word. "The signature is not authentic. And I have here the sworn testimony of a handwriting expert to prove it." A ripple went through the room. Daniel shifted in his seat, but forced his expression to remain calm. The expert took the stand, laying out enlarged photographs of my signature, comparing them to the forged one. "The strokes here are traced. Notice the hesitation at the curves. This is not the hand of Mr. Harlow. This is a forgery." Claire's face drained of color. Daniel gripped the table so tightly his knuckles went white. Then Thompson stood again, holding up the original, notarized will. "Your Honor, this is the true and binding document, signed by Mr. Harlow and witnessed months before any forgery took place. It leaves the estate not to Mr. Daniel Harlow, but to his children, Ella and James Harlow, under a protected trust." Gasps filled the courtroom. Claire covered her mouth. Daniel's smirk collapsed into shock, his face crimson. The judge leaned forward, voice grave. "Mr. Harlow, do you deny submitting this forged document?" Daniel stammered, words tumbling over each other. I was only trying to," Dad said, "he told me." I rose then, cane steady, my voice strong despite my years. "No, son. I told you nothing. You chose this path yourself. And now everyone can see it." The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. The judge slammed the gavel. "This court finds the forged document invalid. The matter will be referred for investigation of fraud. The valid will stands, naming Ella and James Harlow as rightful heirs." Daniel collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. Claire pulled her arm away from his grasp. His children stared at him, confused, hurt. I turned, meeting Ella's wide eyes, James's uncertain frown. I gave them a small nod, one I hoped carried every ounce of love I still had in me. This wasn't just justice. It was protection. And as I walked out of that courtroom, cane tapping against the floor, I felt Margaret's presence beside me once more. "Take care of them." "I did," I whispered. The weeks after the trial moved quickly. News spread faster than I expected. In a small town, nothing stays quiet for long, and the story of Daniel Harlow forging his own father's will for personal gain was too rich for anyone to ignore. His clients began to pull out of his financial advising business one by one. By the end of the month, the office he had opened with such fanfare was shuttered, its windows dark, the "For Lease" sign flapping in the wind. Claire lasted another 2 weeks before she left. She packed her things quietly, moving in with her sister. I heard about it from a neighbor who had seen her loading the SUV with boxes. She didn't even take the wedding photos. Daniel stayed in the house alone. He called once, late at night, his voice slurred and broken. "Dad, you didn't have to do that to me. You ruined me." I listened. Then I said the words that had weighed on me for months, "No, son. You ruined yourself." And I hung up. I haven't heard from him since. But the grandchildren, oh, the grandchildren. They came to me the weekend after the hearing, running up the driveway like nothing in the world had changed. "Grandpa, is it true?" Ella asked, breathless, her eyes wide. "The house is ours one day." "Yes," I told her, bending down despite my stiff knees. "The house, the garden, the land. All of it will be yours and James's. No one can take it from you now." James puffed out his chest, grinning. "I'm going to build a treehouse on the farm." Ella giggled. "And I'll plant 100 roses, just like Grandma." Their joy washed away the last traces of bitterness in me. For them, it wasn't about money or property. It was about roots, about knowing they belonged to something bigger than themselves. That night, after I tucked them in, I sat in the garden again. The roses were blooming late that year, the air thick with their scent. I thought of Margaret, her hands deep in the soil, her laughter mingling with the children's, her whisper that night before she passed, "Take care of them." "I did, love," I said into the night. "And they'll be all right now." The wind stirred the branches. For a moment, I could almost swear I felt her hand in mine. I leaned back in the chair, Kane resting by my side, and let the quiet settle around me, not heavy, not hollow, but peaceful at last. The silence wasn't absence anymore. It was legacy. And this time, I wasn't alone.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.